I thought it's been a really interesting morning, starting off with a discussion from Julian, essentially addressing the business issues around collaboration. And then we've had, Jan-Erik, sorry. Jan-Erik? Sorry, and then,
right here, please.
There is. I'm sorry, Jan-Erik. And then we had 3 talks, of 4 talks, talking about almost collaborative environments. We had Jan-Erik looking at the workflow related collaboration, Jerry talking about standards, and then discussions around the architecture type products. Now, relating to architecture, I have to admit to feeling that we've been here before, and I think it would be interesting to know what's different today that enables us to say we can start talking about architecture again. Before I do that, I was just wondering from Julian if you could perhaps talk about you've heard talks about the architectures we've seen. What are your views about are we ready for the architecture products we're seeing?
That's a good question. Can people hear me? I think actually the architecture piece is obviously very fundamental. It's another important component in terms of how you deliver the digital oil field. We've seen a lot of, in the presentations this morning, we've seen a lot of different aspects of it, people coming at it from different angles. So there's the application of the standards, the application of database sharing, dealing with large data sets in a secure manner. So there's a large number of different aspects of that, and all of them have to be built into a secure architecture. So yes, I think that's very fundamental. Within BP, it was one of the things we did. We built a common data model and a common data architecture so that all deployments of the digital oil field would be built around that common data model and the common data architecture. So yes, I think it is a very fundamental thing indeed.
Okay. Jan-Erik, you've heard these talks. You presumably have thoughts on where the architecture you've heard from Microsoft and Oracle sit with perhaps yourself, where you're coming from.
Well, I think I'm with Julian really. I think the need for this is big in the industry. Obviously, I think to be able to get to interoperability, to make sure you can use best of breed at any point in time is something that we do need. My point was really that I think while we wait for that to happen and to be deployed in such a way that you can actually fulfill that vision, I think there's something we can do, which is more driven from the business needs of the different of the different groups and corporation, regardless of where they're located in a way. So I don't dispute that need. I just think that we cannot wait really. We just need to go ahead and be quite pragmatic about what we're doing, not losing sight of the vision of having these things being built and not only built but being massively deployed. I think that would be beneficial for the industry, definitely.
Okay, right. And then just with Jerry, I'm very conscious with POSC started in this sort of area and then it's got more focused through your work with Samel Prodamel. Do you see a sense of deja vu with with Oracle and Microsoft with these architectures?
There is a sense of deja vu, although I think that the focus that we had 20 years ago, and Paul can probably talk about this better than I can, but the focus we had 20 years ago really almost was on software for the first few years, and it was recognized that that wasn't the right place for us to be, that our place really was in assisting in the development of standardized way of looking at data and data exchange. So the place that we play now is in assisting in developing metadata and ontologies associated with that.
Hossam, what's your reaction?
Yeah, I guess this is an extremely important point. What is raised here about the standards, because from the architecture point of view, no one will dispute the importance of these, if for nothing, at least for understanding the dependencies and the relationships between the components within that architecture, which will basically make the journey easier for any integration and collaboration. However, what is extremely important today is all these discussions about architectures have been there for so many years, and there are at least in every company today corporate architects who are doing that today, reinventing that. The most important part of it is how do we enable the transition today from the old way of doing the architectures or being the corporate policeman more or less into the standard-based architecture. This is the most crucial part today, which is led by standard bodies, by software vendors, and by service providers.
And Paul,
Sure.
What do you bring to the party in this?
Sure. So one thing, if you remember, that's the reason why we have the top down and bottom up. The bottom up is being pragmatic. What's being used, what's being focused on, what are the priorities for the operating companies today that they're working on, trying to resolve. So from there, we try to deliver the internal architecture, the appropriate components to support that, that implementation. Definitely leveraging also the standards in terms of what's mail, product mail, what's out there already in terms of standard specification, because that enables information exchange and open information exchange. So architecture should not get mixed into defining protocols and information exchange that's already well done and covered by the standard bodies. So it's really around not the big bang approach, go in closed door and build out this super architecture, but it's probably pragmatic, be able to. But at the same time, we need to learn from the past. It's not to have these siloed and standalone applications that you go in there and design a framework, and next thing you know, you have one set of application only works for those type of application in that particular domain. And when you start exchanging, getting information across to the different domain, you run into the same issue. So we need to take a look at, in terms of application infrastructure, more holistic approach, because that's where the application is going. It's no longer siloed, but it's an integrated solution.
Okay. Yeah. Any comments or questions to add to this at all?
One of the problems that we have is access to data between the various organizations that take place. And we talk about, nice architectures between Oracle and Microsoft, etc. But one of the problems that everybody's facing is that all the people that collaborate on this data do not sit in the same network, for one. Secondly, they don't work for the same company. And third, they have all kinds of different interests. And all companies, by their sheer nature, are very mistrusting beasts. They don't like service companies to have access or see more than they want them to see. I see that as one of the major obstacles becoming really collaborative. And some of the architectures that are being brought forward are extremely good, but if we don't look at how do we deliver it to, call it a network agnostic environment, we are not moving from where we are. In 2 years' time, 5 years' time, we're still talking about architecture and still haven't solved the real problem.
I think Jan-Erik addressed that to some extent.
I completely agree with you. I think that is one of the big issues, that the security and what is regarded as absolutely proprietary information that we need to keep for ourselves and what we can collaborate on. If we don't solve that problem, we will not have use of the architecture in a sense, because in order for the business value to create, that problem you address, the issue need to be addressed. I completely agree.
Paul and Hossam,
Sure.
first, yeah?
Maybe I can comment on that. So, for example, the solutions that you share, it's about screen sharing. But if you look at it, is an application solution by itself. There are certain things that, in terms of infrastructure service, that you can incorporate into enhance or deliver real-time collaborations. Such things as maybe as an asset team, there's maybe presence, awareness, and capability. Those kind of things that really enable and support collaboration with that type of application. Now, that is something when you talk about cross organizations and so on, the technologies that we have today. Looking at also some of the things that should be in architecture also is you take into consideration federated identity management. There's no need for any one organizations, and actually companies are shied away. Definitely don't want to handle and manage the partners' users and so on. So the emerging technology, over the past few years that we can cooperate in and leverage. So it's just not just the architecture, but the technology that's enabling some of these services also. Claim-based access control, as an example, another standard SAML, for open claim-based access control.
Right. Okay.
I guess really this is a very well-known issue, and the only solution we see for this is that the entire approach to IT is turning more into a service. Today, a simple example of that is the utilities business today. And you are a user of utilities, and you are not the only one. There is an amount of information held about you, about your usage of your electricity, about your billing, and so on, and not only you and your household, but the entire area for load management and the likes. And it is shared to some extent between not just one company or two, a lot who are doing this. And all what you know today is only whoever is billing you. You don't know any of those guys. And I think this is the natural evolution of the IT infrastructure today. It cannot proceed into that level unless these architectures are changing into more open and based on standards. And that's when IT companies all of a sudden become those service companies rather than the providers of the software. They are the providers of those services. And it has to happen. And by the way, the good news is, and as you saw in my presentation, Steve Jobs is making that wave. The iPad is breaking that. And everybody has to comply. We are all pushed into that approach. We'll have to comply.
Yes. Coming from back.
Yeah, Jerry Lunn from Wipro. It's fairly closely aligned to the previous question, but possibly putting out a challenge that I think I've found in the sort of 20-odd years I've been involved in the upstream industry, in that one of the biggest factors that is delaying genuine and deep adoption of standards. Jerry talked about deja vu with the architectures compared with the POSC thing that started. And if you go to any data management conference, whatever aspect of the industry, we're talking about the same things and have done for the past 40 years. But what's the panel's view on whether the problem actually sits between the chair and the keyboard? It's not just the companies, it's actually the users themselves that are resistant to a degree to adopting the standards because they're just too busy to look into it.
Can I talk to Jerry?
Well, it's very true that the problem does sit between the chair and the keyboard in many ways. But there's a parallel to that, to what Dawa just brought up, in that there are a lot of organizations who have adopted the standards and providing services or software to the major oil companies with those standards, but have developed what we call dialects of WITS-ML, which don't exactly speak to each other among other dialects of WITS-ML, because there's a need to be competitive and to have a differentiation from your competitors. So that is one of the issues we're struggling with, is how do we find a true certification process with the standard, so when someone does adopt a standard at a certain versioning, that there are no dialects allowed within that, which would solve part of that problem. The other part is just human nature, and it's a cultural change that you can probably only get through with education and more communication like these conferences like this.
Any other guys got comments to standards?
I have something to add. Back in the 80s, in the oil business, we had a mantra that standards hinder innovation. And everybody was saying that. And it is because we always mistook the standards for regulations and constraints. But as we move forward, I think it is becoming apparent to people that applying standards is the only way of doing the business. You cannot do it anymore the old way. So it is becoming more and more acceptable to look into standards here. Yes, there are still human elements of it, protecting my knowledge, protecting my job, protecting so and so and so. But that is, again, what is happening in this new revolution that is just less than a year old, is you still protecting your job. I'm just handing you the power in a different way. And people like my son, who's 15 years old, developing apps for iPhone, sees that he has the power today. And that's what is going to happen in companies, same approach.
But don't you think, though, there's almost a collusion between a specific service company and a user community to ensure that the user community loves that product to the exclusion of all else, and the service companies are trying to create a competitive advantage to almost lock out their competitors from selling to get their specific product. And you've seen that very much, I see, in the way that Schlumberger behave and Landmark behave in trying to protect their environments.
It's natural, right? I mean, any business want, as you mentioned earlier. But I think what you've seen as a change over time is the pressure, the feedback from the customer, the operating companies are, you have to work and you have to deliver. I remember actually, was it BP or something when the Energistics meeting, unless you are delivering your technology, compliant, leveraging with some else, then we're not going to buy any solution from you. And we actually have customers that have those same partners that have similar common feedback. That basically because companies are standardized on some of the open standards. And we are adopting those technologies. We have to move into more open positions in leveraging standards.
I think it's an important point to make, actually. At the last WITSML SIG meeting, which took place about a month ago in Houston, there was very much a drive to build interoperability into WITSML and to assure compliance. And so the next release that's coming out, which is due around about the end of Q1 2011, is 141, is going to be very much tighter in terms of compliance. And so there's a big piece of work going on in terms of certification, and a number of standard compliance tests that products will go through to certify that compliance. And so I think actually 141 is very much a step in the right direction for all of that. There's an argument that's always been in place that some of the earlier releases of WITSML, it was possible to comply and be totally interoperable. That's going to be much less the case when we get to 141.
Hi there, Nigel Bolchin, BG Group. Very interested in the EnergyML initiative, and I was wondering if there are wider activities involving OAGIS standards to make sure there's no duplication across international standards.
Actually, there's quite a bit of interplay right now with a number of the international standards organizations. As we're starting EnergyML, we're trying to not develop a set of standards, but to develop the business case, which we can then present to others who've shown interest. OAGIS is one that is interested in that. There's a couple of others that we think would be very interested in how this is developed and would be willing to, we hope, participate in the development.
Tom Nick. Okay. Tom Nick from Kongsberg Oil and Gas. You made a comment there, which I liked, that standardization hinders innovation. But there's been so much innovation in the last period that standardization it's the only way to go forward now, because otherwise there's complete destruction in the whole thing. Getting to another point, because we were talking earlier about sales, how do you get that frame of mind into collaboration rooms, facilities, etc. In the old days, let's put it this way, you have two types of, let's say, salesmen. You have the farmers and you have the hunters. Neither one works really that well in that structure. It's been more like, I'd call them fishermen. You had to put out a net, and you'd wait for somebody to come there, or hooks, and wait for somebody to bite, and then you pull them in. Because they had to see that they needed this before we could do anything with it. And with what you gentlemen are doing here, and what I see right now, I think that this is bringing the message out stronger and out, and so the fishing bit is less and less necessary. Now we can be more farmers and hunters now, but I just think it's great what you all are doing right now. So thank you. Keep it up.
Okay. See if I can reuse that analogy.
Thanks. James Grant from Centrica, big gas utility, so from the upstream part. Lots of my business representatives are ex-large super major guys and so on, and you mentioned the term digital oil field and the collapse and horror that's some huge sort of thing that happened to them at BP or something. I just wondered if there's anything on the mid-tier size that anyone's got some real examples where smaller companies have done something about this area and implemented it well. Because normally I only hear about BP, to be honest.
Julian,
yes, we've actually
Paul, you kept mentioning super majors, so
No,
talk about the tier below, the 200,000 barrel a day. So
we are actually starting to work with one or two medium-sized companies, because to a large extent with our kind of business, in the consultancy business, we know that most of the super majors have got some version of the digital oil fields of their own, and so from our point of view, a big target area is starting to build digital oil field capabilities for the small and medium-sized companies, and there are some good examples there. They're perhaps a little less glamorous, that, as I say, that unfortunately a lot of the digital oil field technology has been wrapped up in the glamour of big collaboration centres and multi-industry type activities. But at the grassroots level, the first seeds of it might be nothing more than monitoring real-time well data into something like an OSPI type environment, and that is going on. In fact, there are very few companies now who do not have some form of digital oil field to hang their hat on. They might be just monitoring their valves. They might be just monitoring machinery condition. It might be sort of downhole type information. So I think the answer to your question is yes. It just isn't quite as glamorous.
But isn't there an irreducible cost to get into this game, namely instrumentation?
Yeah. And of course, that's one of the big issues which I tried to bring out in the talk earlier, is that you have to actually establish the business value up front. It's much more important for a small company to understand the business value, arguably, than a big company. A big company will throw its money away quite quickly, but actually a small company won't, and because they just can't afford to. It makes the difference between success or failure. So we have an interesting time.
Yep.
We're not naming
I can give you a good name. Probably the leader in the U.S. in using digital technology is Pioneer Natural Resources. Very, very involved in the development of standards with Energistics, and very involved in using those standards. And they have a plethora of land-based old fields that they're working, and they're not the high value, high risk, sexy stuff that Julian's talking about, which people realize that's where the risk is, that's where standards can help. But they're finding it very useful in what they're doing too. So you might look at what they're doing, and if you want to, I can speak to you after. I can give you a name of someone within the company to talk to.
Paul Mayton, Zillimanite, my own company, Energistics, with whom I'm closely associated. I'd like to make a number of comments, actually. Coming back to the déjà vu remarks, the early emphasis of POSC was on tight integration between applications and data sources. That was, after about 3 to 5 years, was abandoned in favor of looser integration, and along came XML. So a good fundamental in trying to tie software together is focus on the interfaces, and that indeed is what we're doing. What I've heard today suggests that there are other aspects of the interfaces than the data content, which is primarily where we've been concerned. And one of these aspects is security, and I wonder if we ought not to be looking at getting collaboration on agreeing an industry-wide set of security protocols to make this happen. I think another big barrier to adoption is the risk to short-term results. People are at high places in asset management are reluctant to face the risks of trying a new standard and what it might do to his current project and short-term profits. And I'm also going to be somewhat heretical, throw out another remark, but I've kind of come convinced that if you compare our industry with many others, it's a very wealthy industry, and we can afford the inefficiencies that not having standardization result in. If, like some other industries, we had to be much more cost effective, we would have adopted standards and driven those costs out much sooner. An interesting comparison, however, might be banking. I'll say no more. Thank you.
Can I ask Paul to address, I think, two key things about security and interfaces?
So certainly, and actually, there's a project that's going on right here, right now with Energistics and some of the oil company that we're working on. One of them you just brought up is around that joint venture information sharing for partners, and that's exactly what we're looking at to see how applicable in terms of federated identity management technology and solutions out there. And the second one is I touch on is the token access control for entitlement on data. So there's definitely technology to address the security aspect. I think the second one, what's more important is the, it's similar to in the consumer space. If you remember back maybe about 10 years ago, probably half the people in the room would be willing to enter their credit card onto a website to buy something. And today, I don't think any of us would have any concern in doing that, or even transferring money or doing our banking online. Oil and gas industry is going to take a little bit longer, but I think eventually we're going to get to that point. So it's not really in terms of technology has the ability; it's more the level of confidence and comfort in doing that. So in terms of collaboration, again, not trying to boil the ocean, we need to look at specific scenarios where it's maybe low risk first to bring that out. Some information so where you can see collaborations and going cross-boundary, and then that will, over time, will increase in terms of actually delivering that type of collaborations. I want to address also the last point that you mentioned in terms of being more cost-aware or effective in terms of leveraging standard. That is actually happening. I've worked as, before my current role, I actually spent 8.5 years as a consultant out in the field developing custom solutions, before Microsoft also and at Microsoft. And what we've seen is companies are going away from having all this proprietary implementation, building this framework in-house, right? They're going to go look for external existing solutions and framework to do that. For example, Schlumberger, Petroleum solutions, is being used by a lot of companies now as the interpretation desktop, and then companies would just take the algorithms and building plugins, so they don't have to spend the effort and energies in developing. It is not an industry standard, but it's an existing facilities that external, being offered by the industry that companies are leveraging today. And I see more and more of those kind of trends where companies, rather, operating companies do not want to spend time in writing, developing this type of technology.
Jan-Erik, could you address the comment about security?
Well, yeah, I think the analogy with the iPhone is an interesting one. I think one of the reasons why that is so widely successful is that it really has no impact on the security of information. I think everybody agree that the efficiency goes up, and everybody in that party gains a little bit. I think in the oil and gas we see that a lot of times the oil companies and the service companies does not agree on what they need to keep secret from each other, and that it's really hard, even with the technology is the right thing, we have the right technology to actually agree on what to do. In Norway, for instance, we have good example of interoperability on systems when everybody gains and you have efficiency gain in all parties. But it's really hard when you talk about data that there might be some issues on. Well, if the vendor see this, what can be done? What else can be sold to me? These kind of things that they need to be addressed, I think, and it's much deeper than the issue of technology.
Isn't that the need, therefore, for a body to talk about security, to set up some standards or protocols around that?
Well, I think also there need to be talks about contracts and attitudes and other things. I think this is a deeper problem than really dealing with the standards.
Any comments to that, Jerry, at all?
Yeah, I think the one comment I'd make for that on the second point that Paul brought up on what we might call short-term risk aversion is an interesting sidelight of how standards are developed is they tend to be developed by IT people from the major oil companies and product development people from the vendors. But who's the target for the user? The users are the ops guys. They don't get it early on, and so we have a hard. We're discovering it's a little bit harder to convince people who do have operations responsibilities, and their bonuses or their promotions are based on how well they perform. Taking a standard out to them when what they have right now works, and so they have a hard time with how do I introduce something new if we don't know if it works, and so we're working right now to bring an ops group focus on how the standards are developed, so we don't leave them out of the process.
Just a final one from Paul, and then
I just want to relate to the folks here that interesting aspect from Norway is that recently the SEG has published a new standard for data exchange for data coming from the field, SEG-D revision 3, which is an extensive revision. The NPD have already announced that they are going to require all seismic data acquired in the Norwegian sector to be using that standard from 2011 forward. That's one way of driving standards.
Absolutely.
The government says. Any comments? There's two from the back over there, and then I think we're probably getting near lunchtime.
Hi, David Williams from Spartan Solutions. Question I have is whether you think that we're doing enough to sell standards, therefore, to the people that would ultimately benefit. I mean, I as a vendor get asked to provide support for a standard in our product, pressure coming from a large operator like Statoil, for example. But they don't really know why they want us to support that standard. I can't get a clear answer from them. And I just wonder, therefore, whether we are doing enough as a community to sell the use cases, the benefits. What will it actually mean to the people using the software? If you use these products that support these standards, you will be able to do this. If they did not support those standards, you would not be able to do that. I think a lot of the time people just don't know why they would benefit.
I think Jerry's probably got the scars to answer that question.
It's a one-word answer. No, we're not doing. We're not doing enough. What we are trying to do, though, is build a community around the use of the standards. And from what we can see, the only way to do that, to get a community of users, is it's one step at a time. It's definitely not the Big Bang Theory. People don't embrace them immediately. But what we're finding is there are enough of the energy companies, and particularly the NOCs, who are utilizing the standards and don't even know it yet, that we're having nice inroads in getting them involved by going to them and showing them how, if you're using Schlumberger or Landmark or Paradigm or whoever, that you already are using the standards, therefore you should take a role in helping develop and get the standards adoption, and it's one company at a time to get the message out. But your point is well taken.
And then a final question before lunch.
Hi, yeah, Dave Reed, SIC. It's pretty much my comments along exactly those lines. What I tend to see a lot of is that the business tends to see us guys as just selling another IT solution to them, part of the same IT problem, what we're actually trying to fix. And I've also found in past experience with sort of deploying real-time solutions is that you may get one or two sponsors within the business that think it's a great idea, collaboration's a great idea, but try and pass that out to the assets, and they just get a blank wall going, what do we need this for? We use Schlumberger or we use somebody else, we have no requirement for this. So it was more of a comment really that I think we need to get the business buy-in, but the business need to understand what it is that we're trying to put out there, and they also need to evangelise that message to the assets and to their stakeholders. There's an onus of responsibility basically on the business stakeholders there to push it out. We can try and sell it, but at the end of the day, we represent an IT organisation. So,
indeed. I think perhaps Julian's perhaps the best person to address that, because that was somewhat about your opening talk.
Yes, well, I very much agree with that, Dave. Obviously, that's kind of exactly where we sit with that, and I think to a large extent that Paul Mayton's comment was very valid. To some extent, life's been a bit comfortable in the oil and gas industry for some time, really, and we've not really had to adopt standards. We could still make a load of money without actually adopting them. But I think, as we've had a lot of pointers this morning that are showing that times are getting sort of a little bit more difficult for the oil and gas industry, and maybe that's going to sort of give us the drive that we need, because I think there's no doubt about it that the standards are going to save. They're going to save money and they're going to improve efficiency. It's just getting that message out and in a consistent way.
Okay. Thank you. I think it's lunchtime. So with that, I'd like to thank Jerry, Hossam, Julian, Paul, and Jan-Erik for a panel discussion. So lunchtime.